All right, so with that, let me share my screen and I will show you what I have got. So, everyone see my screen here? Yep. See a thumbs up. All right. So, this is the game that, as Stefik said, I have been working on this since we started with Epic. I started this actually on Sunday when we had our sort of open tech support booth where you could come in and ask if you had any like installation questions or anything like that. And otherwise, this has been stuff I've been working on in between sessions and after sessions, etc. And so what I have is this game I call Ground Flight Tactics. Launch this open here. And if I shared my sound correctly, the music should be coming through.
It is.
All right, cool. So what I have here is this isometric top-down sort of view of a 3D strategy tactics kind of game. So I have my player character, which is this plane that I have on the ground. It will never get off the ground, thus the ground flight part of the ground flight tactics moniker. I have a small area in front of me which has a couple of generators off on the sides. I'm moving a selection cursor to look at them right now. My camera follows my selection cursor as I move. I have these two generators that I need to trigger. And once these are activated, there is a gate at the end, this sort of Stargate looking thing, that I can use to move on to the next zone. And importantly, if I wanted to do this accessibly, I'm gonna pop open NVDA.
Welcome to NVDA Ground Flight Tactics window. Sand, 4-3, 2 moves to reach.
So this entire game, although I don't promise it's the best accessible game that's ever been made, I actually think it's lacking in a few places. I didn't have quite enough time to polish it up under a few cases that I'd like to. Overall, this game is responsive to the screen reader, and you can actually get information and relay it back. So if I move my character around here.
Landing pad, 4-2, 1 moves to reach. Landing pad, 3-2, 2 moves to reach.
I get some information about the tiles that I'm moving onto. I get a description. So right now I am on the landing pad. This is where my plane, my player is located. I can move around. I can see that I have a little bit of ability to survey what the environment around me is.
Sand, 3-3, 3 moves to reach. Sand, 3-4, 4 moves to reach.
So I can kind of tell that out in front of my landing pad, I have this stretch of sandy area. If I start sort of navigating around as well, I can see that there are other kinds of objects.
Impassable cover structure, 2-4.
So this one, I'm being informed that there is a structure here. It is impassable, so my player cannot move through it, and it is providing cover, which doesn't matter super much for this particular level I'm on because there's no enemies yet, but that will change. Of course, trying to navigate this game by just like scrolling the keyboard over every single tile in this grid would be very difficult. So I tried to give you at least a little bit of help to do this. So if you press the tab key, you can also jump to objects of interest. So that'll start with the player.
Player, landing pad, 4-1.
So you can always pretty easily get back to wherever you are. And then from there, it can jump you to
goal gate, impassable cover exit gate, 4-9.
So I now have the ability to jump to the gate, so I know where that needs to be. If I move, I can also figure out how far I need to go to get next to it.
Concrete, 4-8, 9 moves to reach.
So right now, I'm 9 tiles away from reaching the goal in order to actually proceed to the next level. But I can't just go to the gate because I also need to hit the generators along the way. So if I keep tabbing.
Player, landing pad, 4-1.
I'm not on any, I wasn't on an object of interest when I tabbed, so it just jumped me back to the player, but I can shift tab and go backwards to get to the back of the list.
Generator 2 not active, impassable cover generator, 1-6. Generator 1 not active, impassable cover generator, 8-5. Sand, 7-5, 7 moves to reach.
So with the information I have right now, which is still, I feel like this would still be difficult to play, but there's enough information that I think that if you were willing to give it some time and patience, you could play this accessibly. Though certainly, I did try closing my eyes and playing through it and seeing how it was, and that's not the best test. You know, you will absolutely have a difference between someone who is a sighted individual who just closes their eyes and pretends as compared to someone who is actually, you know, blind or visually impaired, and they live with it and they are experienced with it. It's not a direct comparison, but it's enough of a comparison. This is definitely easier to play sighted than it is blind. But that being said, I have really done my best to try and make this so that it is possible to play blind. The other thing that I haven't mentioned as far as the accessibility is concerned is at the top of my screen here, I have a few different bits of information that are presented. I have my health, the number of moves I have left in the turn, how many shots I have left this turn, and a button that says end turn, which is kind of formality right now. Again, there's no enemies in this level, so right now I'm the only person who's doing anything. But those are really going to matter once other things show up on the field. And at any point, if I want to jump up to that to get some information, I can just press the Alt key.
Health, 5/5.
So I have 5 health right now out of my total maximum of 5.
Moves, 5/5.
I have 5 moves because I haven't used any of them yet.
Shots, 1/1.
And similarly, I haven't used my 1 shot for the turn yet.
End turn button ends the turn.
And if I wanted to...
This can be done from anywhere with the shortcut control space.
I forgot that I actually added that little bit of information. I added a hotkey so I didn't have to go continuously to the end turn button because that was really annoying to always have to do press Alt and then like tab over to it and then hit it as opposed to just using a hotkey somewhere because you will end turn a lot playing a strategy game like this. But I'm going to go ahead and press Alt and jump back to the play area.
Sand, 7/5, 7 moves to reach.
So I've done a whole bunch of explaining so far, but I haven't actually played the game at all yet. So I'm going to start by just moving towards one of these generators.
Sand, 5/5, 5 moves to reach.
This is 5 moves to reach. I have 5 moves to use, so I'm going to press space.
Space, 0 moves remaining.
And when I
Player,
do that...
Sand, 5/5.
I have to remember how much the screen reader speaks, so I'm not double speaking over here. When I move, I calculate the path that the plane, the player, needs to travel, and then split it up into discrete steps where it will move into whatever tile it needs to. It'll take a moment to stop and rotate it to get it facing the right direction, and then it'll do it again. And this works for even pretty complicated paths. So I'm going to end my turn here.
Space, player, Sand, 5/5.
I mentioned that there are some things that I don't think that I've done quite enough to give you accessibility information. That's one of them. Even though I just ended the turn with the hotkey, Control Space, it doesn't tell you that a new turn has started or anything. And the reason I ended my turn was because I'd used all 5 of my movement. I couldn't move again until I ended my turn. So if I move over 1 to the left.
Sand, 4/5, 1 moves to reach. Impassable girder supports, 4/6. Sand, 4/7, 3 moves to reach.
Right now I can see that if I go a little bit to the left and forward, there is some objects that I can't move through, but if I just get to the other side, I can tell it to just navigate around it for me.
Space, 2 moves remaining. Player, Sand, 4/7.
And I'm going to end the turn, I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to go all the way around this.
Space, player, Sand, Sand, 4/5, 4 moves to reach. Sand, 3/5, 5 moves to reach. Space, 0 moves remaining. Player, Sand, 3/5.
So as I've done this, the way that I've accomplished this is I went and I looked up a pathfinding algorithm, and I'm using what's called A star. And the really important thing to understand about A star is if someone asks you, hey, how did you do that? And you said, I implemented the A star pathfinding node search algorithm. It makes you sound very smart. Other than that, you don't really need to know exactly what it's doing. But that is what I ended up using in order to make this work. Now that I've done some more explanation, let's actually hit one of these generators.
Space, player, Sand, 3/5.
So, ended my turn to give myself more moves again.
Sand, 7/5, 4 moves to reach. Space, 1 moves remaining.
So I've just moved
Player,
up.
Sand, 7/5.
At some point, I'll remember to stop double speaking over the screen reader. I've just moved up next to one of the generators.
Generator 1 not active, impassable cover generator, 8/5.
If I go ahead and I activate this now using the same key that I would use to move to one of these tiles.
Space.
I play this sound that lets you know that I've just turned on one of the generators. But at this point, I still have another generator I haven't hit yet.
Generator 2 not active, impassable cover generator, 1/6.
So I've just tabbed over to the other one because it's a priority object. I can tab between them. And now I know that there is another one at these coordinates that I need to get to. And if I want to figure out how far it'll take me to get next to it, because I can't actually land on top of it, but if I want to go next to it.
Sand, 1/5, 6 moves to reach.
So I'm slightly farther away than I'm going to reach in a single turn. So this is going to take me 2 turns, but I'm going to go ahead and end my turn to get my moves back.
Space. Player. Sand. 7-5.
And as I ended the turn, it'll be more obvious once enemies come into play, but when the new turn begins, I slowly pan the camera back to where the player is, and I'll be doing that while things are going on in the game. It's just panning the camera automatically to points of interest as things are happening. I'm going to move my cursor back over towards the generator.
Sand. 1-5. 6 moves to reach.
Accessibility-wise, it tells me that 6 moves to reach, and I know that I only have 5 moves a turn, so I'm not going to get there this turn. Visually, I've also changed my little selection cursor. I have this box that is moving along a grid I have rendered on the ground, and a spinning diamond shape that I have on top of it. And that diamond and the box that are on the grid, these change color depending on context. So right now, it's farther than I can move. It's a valid place to move, but I can't get there this turn, so I have this blue indicator. If I want to look at some of the terrain that is...
Sand. 2-5. 5 moves to reach.
If I want to look at terrain that I can reach this turn, it has this nice yellow, golden sort of view. This is something I can do this turn. Or if I move to something that is impassable.
Impassable rocks. 2-2.
I have this just sort of dim gray color that indicates that you can't go over there. You can still move the cursor onto it. You need to in order to get accessibility information. You want to know that you can't move here or that it might provide cover. But if I actually try and go there...
Space. Space.
You're not allowed to play a little sound and say, hey, don't do that. I'm going to move towards the generator.
Sand. 2-5. 5 moves to reach. Space. 0 moves remaining. Space.
And at this point, I'm just going to go through the steps. I'm going to hit the other generator. I'm going to go to the gate, and we can see what happens from there.
Sand. 2-6. 1 moves to reach. Space. Space. Player. Sand. 2-7.
And now that both of the generators are on, I've also added this little ambient humming noise. This gives you sort of an indication that the gate is active at this point. You are good to go. You are ready to proceed to the next level, which things will get a little bit more interesting from here.
Sand. Concrete. 4-8. 4 moves to reach.
Or at least they will get more interesting next turn because I only have 3 moves. I need 4.
Sand. Space. Space. Player. Sand. 4-7. Concrete. Space. Goal gate. Impassable cover exit gate. 4-9.
So now that I'm here, I'm going to activate it now that it is powered and...
Space.
I've now gone to the 2nd level. I'm using multiple scenes for this game, and I am swapping them in and out as you move between levels. Among other things, I've also changed up the music for this level. I wanted something a little bit more active because there are now enemies on the screen, and I can tell that by using my tab to move between the priority targets in the map.
Goal gate. Impassable cover exit gate. 9-8.
So there's the goal gate.
Generator 1 not. Generator 2 not active.
There's still the generators here. I just killed the screen reader output early here so I can talk. But if I press tab again...
Drone 1 not on cardinal direction. Sand. 11-9. 8 moves to reach.
So drone 1 not in cardinal direction. Basically, what I'm just telling the player here is that there is an enemy. I give them the coordinates as to where it is. But that part, not in cardinal direction, is really important because my player can shoot at enemies, but I am restricted to shooting along the cardinal directions. In the same way that I can only move in straight lines, I can also only shoot in straight lines. If I continue to tab, I can hear that there are quite a few enemies here.
Drone 2 not on cardinal direction. Drone 3 not on cardinal direction. Drone 4 not on cardinal direction. Drone 5 not on cardinal direction. Sand. 0-4. 10 moves to reach.
And if I was a little more patient about tabbing through each of those, I would have heard the coordinates and the number of moves to reach to get a sense of how far away each of these enemies were. So again, this would take, you know, some time and patience to actually go through and try and do this successfully because visually I can just sort of see where things are. I haven't figured out a good way of giving you that sort of overview or the gestalt of the situation in terms of accessibly interacting with that. I had some ideas for trying out some things, sonification or whatnot, but the reality is I made this over the course of the last several days and there were limits to what I could do in the time. But let's go back to my player now.
Player, landing pad, 9-3.
And so I have a whole bunch of enemies here, these drones on the map. And so I want to deal with one of them. The most obvious one is this one that is to my right and ahead of me. I can see here.
Land, set, impassable girder supports, 11.5.
Oh, that's funny. That's actually mischaracterized. It thinks it supports instead of low rocks. In terms of its mechanics, the important part here is that it is something that can't be passed through, but it's not providing cover. I'm going to move on to it again so you can hear that.
Impassable girder supports, 11.5.
It's impassable, but it doesn't say that it's cover. Anything that is cover, it will explicitly say so. So what that means is that if I want to, I can sort of park myself behind it.
11.4, 3 moves to reach. Space. 2 moves remaining.
So I've now moved
Player,
myself.
sand.
So I'm in the same column as this enemy. I'm going to move my cursor over them.
Drone 1 in sights, sand, 11.9, 7 moves to reach.
And now the drone is in sight. If I press my spacebar.
Space.
I have this little barrage of lasers that I shoot out, these 4 little spheres, and then when I destroy the enemy, it erupts into this shower of the best explosion that I could do without doing something really complicated that is difficult to do in the engine right now. But basically, the entirety of this game doesn't use physics, except for I wanted to have it on for generating that wave of explosive particles when you destroy things and allowing them to sort of fall away. From here, I'm going to end my turn, and we're going to see what else happens when there are enemies involved.
Space. Player, sand, 11.4.
This is another case where I didn't have time to figure out exactly what I should report excessively for this. Because it's turn-based, I could like go and check each of them again to see what they've done on their turns, but it doesn't tell me, which is a bit inconvenient. But what has happened is that of the 4 remaining drones that are on the screen, each of them in sequence plays a little sound as it moves towards me. And the camera snaps to each one as they're moving. So visually, I can see what things are moving on the screen and how they are approaching me. What I haven't seen yet is what will happen if they actually do reach me. I'm going to get a little bit closer to one.
Sand, 11.6, 4 moves to reach. Space. 1 moves remaining. Player.
So at this point, I am 3 tiles away from one of these drones.
Drone 2 in sights, sand, 11.9, 3 moves to reach.
I could just shoot this thing because I'm in a cardinal direction with it, but I'm going to shoot one of the other ones instead. I can shoot as far as I can go in any cardinal direction unless there's cover in the way.
Drone 4 in sights, sand, 4.6, 7 moves to reach. Space.
Now there are 3 enemy drones remaining, but I'm going to end my turn just a little bit too close to one of these guys.
Sand. Space.
So these little drones
sand.
Will attempt to run up right next to you, will detonate themselves, and if we look at my health now, I have just lost a point of health because I was standing next to one of them when they blew up. This damage is going to persist between the levels, so I do need to be a little bit careful about this. But at this point, I have 4 health remaining. There are 2 drones left. Each of them can only do 1 damage, so I'm going to make it through this level. But that doesn't mean I should take damage willy-nilly. I'm going to tab to some of these enemies.
Drone 5 in sights, sand, 4.6, 7 moves to reach. Drone 3 not on cardinal direction, sand, 3.7, 9 moves to reach. Generator 2 not active.
Okay, so just tabbing through, I can tell there are 2 enemies right now. One of them is in my sights, the other is not. And just listening to how far away they are, they're both decently far away right now. I'm going to go ahead and shoot on the one that's in my sights.
Drone 5 in sights, sand, 4.6, space.
So that's 1 more drone defeated. I have all my moves for the turn still.
Player, sand, 11.6.
So let's move up to this generator that I'm near.
Sand, space. 1 move. Generator 1 not active. Impassable cover generator, 11.11.
I'm gonna activate this, and now
space.
I'm 1/2 of the way to completing this level. End my turn.
Space. Sand, 11.6. 4 moves to space. 1.
And at this point, I'm just gonna mop up the last of the drones. I'm gonna turn on the other generator, go through the teleporter, and we'll see what the last level has in store for us.
Drone 3 in sights, space. Sand, space, sand,
At this point, it's basically just an exercise in getting to the generator on the far side of the level and getting back.
space, sand, space, 0,
It's a lot easier to run and hunt down the generators when there aren't enemies here to attack me.
space, player, sand, space, generator 2 not active, space, sand, space.
You can now hear that sort of ambient hum again. The generators are both going, and now the teleporter is available. Let's go ahead and get there now.
Sand, space, sand, space, sand, concrete, space, 3 moves, goal.
Alright, I am now right on top of the goal here.
Goal gate, impassable cover exit gate, 9A.
It's active, so I'll hit the spacebar and we'll see level 3.
Space.
And I've got a few things going on here. One is that I have immediately gone to more intense music because this is the final level and I want to feel like it. There are a bunch of drones on this level.
Goal gate, generator, turret 1 not on cardinal direction, impassable cover turret, 21A.
I've also added turrets, so now the enemies can shoot back at me. Specifically, the turrets have similar rules that I do. The turrets can't move, they're stationary, but if I'm in a straight line with them when I end my turn, when they go, they are going to shoot back at me on these straight lines. But, as I will show you, there's also a little bit of, I could be a little bit cheeky with them. So I'm going to start by moving my player.
Sand.
Right now there is a drone that is ahead of me and to the right. It's the only one on this side of the map. I'm going to go and take care of this one first.
Space. 0 move. Drone 10 in sights. Space.
And now I'm going to end my turn. I'm going to let all of the enemies go. And as you can see, there are quite a few drones on this level.
Space. Player, sand, 25-6.
So at this point, if I look directly to my left...
Drone 1 in sights, sand, 21-6, 4 moves to reach.
There is a drone that's relatively close to me right on one of my cardinal directions. I could just shoot this thing right now, but something else that it's doing is it's standing right in front of...
Turret 1 not on cardinal direction, impassable cover turret, 21A.
This thing is in the same column as one of these turrets, and the turrets really want to shoot at me, and they are so willing to shoot at me that they'll try it even if there's something in the way.
Sand, 21-5. Space. 0 moves remaining. Player.
So now I've moved myself so that there is this enemy drone in between me and the turret. I'm gonna end my turn.
Space. Player, sand.
And so at this point, I could go and do the rest of the level. There are, up ahead, I can see that the level moves from this sort of desert valley.
Sand. 6, impassable cover pipes, 16-7.
Things start getting a little bit more industrial at the end of my level as it starts moving into...
Concrete, 11-7, 12 moves to reach.
I have this sort of bunker on the far side of the level, and I can see that there are generators in here, and they are surrounded by turrets, and there are a lot of these drones. I could deal with all of the drones, shooting them all, letting the turrets help me deal with them. I could make my way to each of the generators, make my way back to the teleporter. But I also could just let these things blow me up and see what happens if I lose. So, I am going to...
Sand.
I'm going to stand right where I'm at right now, and I'm going to end my turn.
Space. Player,
all these drones,
sand.
All of these drones continue to sprint right at me. I'm going to move a little bit closer to these drones. I'm going to let them do their handiwork here.
Space. Aw shucks. You've been destroyed. Player, sand, 7. Scene 5. Exit.
A most glorious ending for our little ship. The text-to-speech says, "Aw shucks." There's kind of like a bam, bam, and then you just explode. Except I didn't get around to actually removing the player, so if you wanted to, the zombie plane can still kind of keep flying around and keep doing stuff. But on our system, you should probably stop playing now. You've already lost. The alternative was that if I had gone through the rest of the level, beat all the drones, turned on the generators, got all the way back to the gold gate and went through, it would have output something on my console that says, "Wow, that was the last level. Good job." That's basically it. A lot of time went into the gameplay, less time went into the ending of the gameplay. I'm gonna go ahead and close the game. Before I start going off on anything regarding the stuff I've done in here, are there any questions about the stuff I have?
Yeah, I asked this in Slack, and Andy gave a really good answer. But I was wondering from you, from the creator of the game, why did you do grid-based as opposed to being able to shoot like 360?
So the honest reality is that I decided to do it that way because I had limited time and it was easier.
Okay.
There are some gameplay benefits to doing it that way too, because if I force you to sort of lock onto the grid and I force enemies to lock onto the grid, then it changes how the game plays. But it does somewhat devalue cover, which my original plan for this, taking cover was going to be an important part of it. There would be a turret up ahead. It's covering like a 180-degree field of view. And the only way to sneak past it would be to continuously end your turn in cover, make sure that it can never see you. It's a lot easier to avoid the turrets if they just shoot in straight lines, but they're still kind of interesting because I can take advantage of that to make them shoot at enemies instead.
Is it easier to program the straight lines than a 300? Would that require a lot more coding to get involved with that?
In a vacuum, it wouldn't. But because of how my game is set up, it takes extra effort. Because basically, if I wanted to do something like I wanted to check to see, I have my turret here, I have the player over here, and I just want to check, like, is this in a field of view in front of the turret? That's pretty easy to calculate. If I wanted to then say, okay, there has to be objects that might be cover in the way, I could do what's called ray casting, which is basically this concept of you start with a point and you just kind of like draw a line from that point to another point, and you just check to see if there's anything in between. What things does that line run through? That's a little bit of effort, but it's doable in the engine. The engine can do that for you. But the big thing is that because I already had these tiles set up, I knew I wanted to use the tiles for how character movement and navigation was going to work. In order to do the sort of point to point, like just allowing you to fire 360 degrees, to do that kind of firing and to check for cover, I need to not just explicitly check for, are there objects in the way? I need to chart a path through the tiles where it goes through, because each of those tiles might have enemies on them or cover on them. And that's doable, but it was more than I wanted to spend time on while I was just kind of sprinting down on this particular game. Everything is just like trying to do things that are cool as quickly as possible so that I can show them off at the end of the week.
William,
Yes.
Couple of questions. Do you have like multiple scenes?
Yes. So in my game, I have 3 scenes that I've made, and I've called them level 1, level 2, and level 3.
How do you create the additional scene?
So the way that I did that was I have just a template project that I have somewhere else that has a blank scene file in it, and I just copy pasted it over.
Okay.
It would be really convenient to just like right click on scenes and do new file and like be able to make a new scene file or something here.
Okay.
But we haven't done that yet, so right now it's just copying and pasting it into the right folder.
Right folder. So
Yeah.
we can actually copy the scene in the first place, the blank scene in the first place, and rename it to something else, and then just okay, gotcha.
Yep. And then all you have to make sure you do is in the file when you load the level, you need to change what the scene loading function looks like, which I have in here somewhere. Did I skip past it? file set. Oh yeah, file set path scenes level, and then so instead of scene.qs, this is now doing my scene/level, and then I give the level number, and I load the scene that way.
Gotcha. Okay. Another question is that I saw that behavior. You used the behavior.
Yes, I do have. I have one behavior in here, and that's just for the end turn button. I didn't end up really going and clicking up on the end turn button, but if you wanted to, that's one way you could end the turn. So the way that you make buttons do stuff is using behaviors.
Oh, okay. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So how did you get the explosion? I love those explosions.
Oh, the audio for that?
The audio, and I guess visually as well, because I've always wanted to make a fireworks simulation.
Yeah. So it's funny. I was looking around for an explosion on Freesound originally, and eventually what I decided to do is I had made, I think, I want to say 2 epics ago, I made a different game that was kind of similar-ish to this. It was a 2D game that was also a tile-based, turn-based sort of thing, but much less complex than this one was. And that one involved you shooting robots and they exploded. And I actually realized I already had the sounds for those. So I just went and reused those same sounds, but the original sounds were from Freesound. And it took quite a while to find the ones that I wanted, that I liked. But if you want those particular explosion sounds, all of the sounds that are in there are in the resources for this. And this project is available on our public example games repository. So you can clone this just like you would the other stuff that we talked about with the version control. You can grab those resources yourself if you want that particular sound.
Yeah, but how to do the explosion visually? Is there some algorithm behind
so
it?
The way that I have this set up, I'm going to scroll down to, I have a function in here, an action in here called explode tile, where I tell it where I want it to happen. I tell it how many particles I want to make. And what I've done here is I have a loop where I make up to the number of particles requested. I make a model, or in this case, I call it a particle because I do some little extra legwork, which I'll explain in a little bit. But basically, it's just a model. For this model, I load it with a sphere that is really small. It's just 0.1 units in the X, Y, and its Z, and each of these are yellow for the explosion. I add it to an array because I end up doing some bookkeeping with this, basically making sure that after a certain amount of time has passed that I get rid of it. And the big thing that is important about this is for each of these motes that I make, each of the models, I set the position of it to where I want the explosion to originate. I turn physics on it, and then I turn off the collisions, I set collidable to false, so they can't hit each other. They have physics, but basically that's just so that they can be impacted by force and by gravity. I put them all in one spot. I densely pack them in, and then I apply force to them, and I use a random number generator to offset a little bit how much they're going. So on the X direction, they're going a random number between 0 and 1, subtract it by a half, and then multiply it by 250. So it ends up in practice going somewhere between negative 125 and positive 125 on the X. And then I do something similar for the Y and the Z. So it's just put a whole bunch of these models in one place, give them a force that has a little bit of random component to it that sort of just throws them up and outwards. And then I apply all of them onto the game. And then the one other step I do is I have some extra code here. I mentioned that this is technically a particle as opposed to a model. And basically I just have some extra stuff in here where I have a timer on each of these where it checks to see, hey, how long has this thing been around for? And if it's been more than its lifespan, which by default is 1 second, but I think for the explosion, I actually set them up to 3. So after 3 seconds, take this thing and get rid of it from the game.
Okay.
Uriel?
Yeah.
How much RAM does your computer have to, have to run this game?
So I didn't like benchmark this or anything. I don't know exactly how intensive it is. It never made my computer choke, but I am on a really nice like gaming rig. Like I custom built this computer to play intensive games. So if I started running into performance issues on this computer, I would be concerned. That being said, I am curious. I will going to pop open the game again, and I'll pop open my task manager. I have, I believe, 16 gigs of RAM on this machine, so more than you would expect almost anyone else to have on theirs, right? Because this is definitely the exception and not the rule. I'm going to pop open my task manager, and we'll look at the performance here. So right now, I have two OpenJDK platform binaries. One of these is Quorum Studio. Oh, here we go. Okay, so right now, running the game just without doing anything yet, this game is taking about 750 megabytes of RAM. Which, you know, as a starting point, that isn't bad, I think. If we kept going and playing through the game, we might see that it gets higher as we go into more levels. The levels get bigger. A bunch of enemies appear on the screen. Some explosions start happening. But unless you want me to actually go through the steps and test that, I would guess that this is probably...
No, I was just curious. So it was, yeah, it's great.
Any other questions? I have a couple of things I wanted to touch on, but I'm happy to answer questions before I get there if there are things, because otherwise we'll all get distracted.
I don't have a question so much as just to say this was pretty awesome. Like,
thank you. I had a lot of fun building it.
That's pretty clear.
I was up until like 12:30 last night working on this.
I'm not surprised by that. I mean, people probably think that I've seen this, but I actually haven't. William just kind of was like, during these epics, he always just goes off and has fun. And then I ask him sometimes, hey, what you doing? He's like, I'm not telling you. So like, I've seen nothing. I contributed literally zero to this, but I just want to say how impressed I am. It's pretty fantastic job. So
thank you. I have to say, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. So actually, Quorum itself doesn't have a particle builder. That means you have to practically build, do a particle builder for yourself. Is it that?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the
it doesn't have a particle. You know some
game right, particle engine. Yeah.
Builder,
so
particle
the short answer is no. Right now, we don't have a particle engine in the game. We have something that was worked on, and as far as I know, I've not tested it myself, but we do have a functional particle system that was built by some of Stefik's students at the university as part of a class project. And from what I understand, it does work, but we haven't been able to go and actually integrate it into the standard library yet. So I didn't have it accessible to me, and it's not currently accessible to anyone else other than you could go find it and you could put it into your code manually, or you could, import it from elsewhere. But because it's not part of the standard library, it's just a bit of a hassle. So it was easier for me to go manually make these very simple particles for myself.
Yeah, the reason we do that is because sometimes we have like senior project teams that are interested in sort of making something, and oftentimes they do a good job, but the level of ease of use of the various libraries that get built for the senior project teams always is kind of a mixed bag. Like sometimes teams will really knock it out of the park, and other times their code will like work-ish. And so we don't really put stuff like that into the standard library just because we're always a little bit terrified to try to maintain it.
Yeah, of course.
But what I was going to say is the other reason that we haven't integrated that specifically yet is because next release, we're going to be working on what's called shader support. And if we're going to have stuff like particles, it's probably better at the end of the day to do it through shaders than it is to do it through the objects, because it's dramatically more efficient on the GPU to do it that way. So.
Yeah, that's right. I understand that. The other thing I want to ask is, so far all the example games I've seen from Quorum is more like turn based and all that. But what if I wanted to build, let's say, an ancient adventure game, something bigger, something much more ambitious? Can I use Quorum to do it? Because I'm not really interested in turn based strategy games. I'm more interested in ancient adventure games.
Sure. So, theoretically,
there's soccer. Yeah,
there's no reason. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, or soccer. Those kind of things. I'm not so interested in like turn based games. So, is there some potential in Quorum for me to do that?
Sure. So the reason why I end up making turn-based games a lot of times whenever I'm producing something to show off Epic is because as far as my strong suits go, I really know what I'm doing with the engine. And when it comes to accessibility, I have some ideas of accessibility, but I don't know it as well. So it's something that if I'm gonna build something that is using the screen reader for accessibility in particular, it's not clear to me not how you would like implement it in terms of technology, but I don't know what the design would look like in order to make like a broader scale most likely real time sort of game that is using the screen reader to convey information to you. And for these projects, I like to use the screen reader to show it off, just because there are a lot of tools that you can play sounds with to do sonification, but there are not a ton that can do graphics and also report to the screen reader. So I just like to show that off during the demos. But
the other thing that might be worth mentioning is that actually when he's doing turn-based games, William actually has to program that. So like there's nothing in the engine about turns or anything like that. That's something actually William intentionally programmed. If you wanted to do a game of a different style, there's nothing stopping you. It's still a programming language. You can do it with it whatever you want.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So what else do you expect from your Quorum 9 based game engine? That means I would expect that as Quorum increases in power and flexibility and usefulness, I would expect so will the game engine, right? So what else do you expect the game engine to give up in the near future?
So I think that in the short term, one of the things that we're looking at doing is that we're going to be, as Stefik mentioned, that we're adding the shader support into the language, which is going to be, it won't immediately have any kind of impact on accessibility. It's a graphics feature, but it's something that facilitates a lot of other stuff. So not something that I'm promising. I'm not saying that we are going to go do this or that we're going to go do this right now, but some of the things that this facilitates that we have had interest in the past, and we might end up doing if we had the time and opportunity in the future, is stuff like accessible 3D terrains. The shaders themselves aren't necessary for the accessibility part of it, but if we're going to make a terrain, it's really difficult to make a 3D terrain that looks good without the use of shaders. And with all of our stuff, our attempts are to be inclusive. So it's not exclusively just that something is accessible, but it also looks good enough. It is usable by someone that's sighted, so that you can give different people the same thing and they can all interact and use it and together. So that's an example of the sort of thing that we would be looking at in the long term if we had shaders to facilitate.
One other might be in terms of that particular technology. So for people that don't know what shaders are, because I guess we've thrown around that term a little bit, but we haven't really said what they are. So just to be clear, what a shader is on your computer, there's this chip, and they call it a graphics processing unit or a GPU. And what you're doing when you're running a game of any kind, in fact, really any graphics at all, like on just anything on that shows up on your monitor, it gets sent down to that chip as linear algebra, basically, right? Like vectors and matrices and stuff like that. And what a shader does is it does computations on those vectors or matrices in a very specific kind of way, and it manipulates them. So that means, like, if you want to have, instead of a hard box, you want it to be soft and mushy like Jello, that's how you do it, is a shader. If you wanted to support water effects, shaders. If you want to have terrain with really convincing lighting, shaders. If you want to have shadows, shaders. Yeah. If you want to have blocks for block programming that look really, really nice and pretty and stuff like that, shaders. If you want to have the user interface library so that it looks a lot prettier than it does now, so it looks all shaded and beautiful and blah, 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 shaders. But the catch is shaders only exist on the GPU, on the graphics chip. Let's just be clear, graphics chips don't connect to screen readers. So the real challenge here, I'm sure you're all shocked. The real challenge here is the Quorum team basically has to invent this sort of like pathway where we can send information back and forth and lie to the screen reader even more than we already are, in order to make a technology like this accessible over time. And so it'll take a little bit of time for us to actually invent the stupid thing. We're guessing probably a few months of like William time in order to make this technology sort of at the first passable phase. But once that's there, the really key thing is it facilitates like 100 other potential technologies that we can put together on the back end and make it super, super graphical and also super accessible. So that's why we're going down that sort of rabbit hole in the short.
Yeah, so I assume you would be very strongly glued to OpenGL, and
no, this is a long conversation actually. So the design of shaders is an immensely complicated topic, and yes, there are specific shader languages for OpenGL. However, it's not even that simple because it depends on what version, under what condition, and it depends on what platform you're on, and all sorts of. If you're on the web, are you on? Are you using Metal? Are you? So this is unfortunately. I wish I could say this had a simple answer. It doesn't. It's very, very ridiculously, painfully complicated, and that's what we're going to be looking into in the next few months to figure out what the right strategy is because we don't know yet. So.
Are you going to be sort of compatible with Blender? Shaders done with Blender, because I believe Blender is one of the best graphical.
Blender is a tool for 3D modeling.
Yeah,
and I don't have the foggiest idea whether what we'll have will be compatible or not. This is part of what we're going to be investigating, is how to do it, because the trick is, if we just expect everybody to use existing tools and those existing tools are inaccessible, then we're stuck in this thing where we've invented a technology that we know some people in the community can't use, which to us is not acceptable. So what we're looking into is, how do we make it full pipeline development? Like, do we want to do, how do we make sure that someone can be meaningfully included at all steps of that accessibility pipeline? And that'll actually take some real investigation. Like I said, probably a few months of work to figure that out.
So why did you choose OpenGL in favor of DirectX?
Go ahead, William. I have a guess.
Well, the short and skinny of it is basically just that because we have a desire to support both Mac and Windows, DirectX is not a great option for that, especially at the time that we made it. I know that there's been some motion with, like, Valve has like their Proton setup that, it's possible to run on like Linux and Unix machines, things that would normally be using, I believe, DirectX. I'm not super well versed in it, but there's been some motion. But especially when we first made it, part of our desire was make sure that we wanted to make stuff that was usable on different platforms. So that was part of it.
Yeah, a secondary reason too is that we used to run these conferences at the direct schools, and many schools don't actually have advanced graphics hardware. And I bet you're shocked by this. Many schools for the blind also don't care too much about which graphics chip they've purchased, right? And so, yeah, I know that's shocking. And so one of the things that we did at the very beginning when we were designing the engine is we went and we actually looked at hardware at some of the schools, at like the Washington State School for the Blind or places like that. And we looked at like what chips they have so that we knew what we did would actually run on them. So this is one of the tricky things with this new generation of the engine with the shaders and stuff, is we have to make sure that whatever tech ends up being on the back end is actually usable by the schools, because we don't want to basically, turn it off everywhere. But there's a third issue too, and that is that OpenGL is oddly much more universal than any of the other graphics engines. DirectX is Windows only for the most part-ish, right? I know, other than this thing. Mac has moved predominantly to Metal. Metal is not compatible anywhere else. And then on the web, it's all OpenGL, but it's a special version called WebGL. And so in any case, all of this is kind of in the weeds, so to speak, of the details of the tech. And we could probably talk about this endlessly. But the point is that, like, these decisions get pretty complicated. And this is why we're going to be spending a few months over the next year reimagining some of the stuff on the deep back end, which most people in the community won't really even notice in the short term. So
thank you. Thanks for your answers.
No problem.
It's really refreshing.
Any other questions? Okay. So as far as the schedule is concerned, we have another half hour, so I'm happy to highlight some of the extra things that are here, but I also know it's the end of EPIQ, and this is the sort of time that some people might be beginning to flag a little bit, or to just want extra time on their stuff. So how do we feel? Do we want a little bit more highlights into the code in the game here, or do we want to call this a little early so people can have the chance?
Actually, I was going to ask. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's a more small thing for me. If someone can send me and someone technical into the the break room. I have a computer problem with Quorum Studio, so I would appreciate that.
Cluthy, do you think you'd be willing?
Take a look.
I'll move you to room 2, Co.
Yeah, I would like some help too, but it's not a computer problem. It's a gaming audio problem. I'm trying something rather ambitious. So if possible.
Who else do we have on?
If there's no one else immediately available, I can't see the participant list easily to see who's here, but if there's no one else available in the interim, I could take a look at it with them once.
Well, we want to let you finish your session. And
yeah,
I'd like to be there for that too. So Amanda, Rada, do you think you'd be willing to jump in a room with Pranav? I don't know if you're still there. Otherwise,
I can wait for Willem to
Yeah.
finish his session.
why don't we
all
just
right.
wait then for just a
Yep.
few? So
Yeah,
Okay.
That's good. Yeah.
Adam, did you have something that you were going to ask?
Yes. So for the set position, you have the universal object map in here
Yes.
for your explode tile. If I wanted to do implement this wherever a turret might explode or whatever, but I don't have that object, would I just have to go back to referring to an individual, each individual turret, or?
Yeah, so basically, there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm doing behind the scenes with this map object that I've made for myself, which the map object does a bunch of the stuff that's like pathfinding. And also, I mentioned before about how, because I had things sort of constrained to the tiles and the grid, that made certain things easier and certain things harder. And the map is basically in charge of taking anything that is a tile and translating it into the world space and vice versa. So in this case, when I'm using the map, basically I'm just doing a conversion, trying to say, hey, I have a grid coordinate and I need this to be a space in 3D space. So if you wanted to do this for your own thing, like you wanted to simulate this code, instead of saying, hey, I'm trying to get the position of a particular tile and do some translation and some stuff, you would basically just say, hey, I have a turret here and here's its XYZ, and that's all you would do.
Okay, so I've already got, in a collision event, I've already got object A or item A and item B or whatever it might be. And I would just have it pull up the coordinates for those things and just have it replace the thing.
Yep.
Okay, and set lifespan 3 is 3 seconds long, right?
Yes, so for my particles, I had it set up so that it has a lifespan of 3 seconds. And if you'd like, I can go a little bit more into detail here about how I handle that.
Sure.
So the way that I have this set up right now is at the top of my class, I have this array of particles, which I call particles. And the way that this is set up is each of my moat objects is this special class of particle I made. We didn't touch on writing your own classes and doing inheritance as part of them in the sessions, but we did touch on inheritance just a little bit. But basically the gist of this is I have made a model, or I've made a class that is a model, so it gets to do all the things that models can do. I named it particle. It has just some really basic stuff for keeping track of what its maximum number of seconds it should live for is, and then this current time. And in the game engine, we have this update action that gets called on every single frame of animation. If you have a model or some other item that's added to the game, it also gets to do updates on every frame. So each individual model is responsible for checking its own current time and just adding onto that timer. So it keeps track of how long it's been alive. Does that make sense before I show the other half of this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other half of this is inside the update action on this class in the main. Right here. I have a few different things that I'm doing on every single frame. One of them is the step processor. This does not imply that the processor is only related to me via marriage. This is a processor for steps. The step processor handles like basically all the turn-based elements, making sure that people do actions in the correct order. The thing that you actually care about here is this loop right here. I have my particles array, and I just iterate over it. So I have my counter, and I check for each of them. Get the particle. I check if it is expired. This is just an action I wrote that says, is the timer greater than the lifespan? So basically just if the particle's timer is greater than its lifespan, I remove it from the array of particles, and I also remove it from the engine at that point.
And then every time a new shot gets fired and it blows up something, it will reintroduce those particles.
Yep, new particles
via
get made and
your
they get put
other
into that same
action.
array using the other
And
action.
then this update just removes them later.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
And the particles in the array, it's this class, right? The model class, like the 2D model or a 3D model class, right? Where when you
the array is an array of particle objects, which each particle inherits from model.
right.
Yeah.
How do you instantiate the particle class? How are you instantiating a class in Quorum?
As in, how do I make the particle object in the individual variables, or how do I make the new class?
No, making the new class, I think I know how to do that. Okay. But when you want to call that class, how are you declare a variable of that type?
Yep.
And then do you have a new or something?
No. So the way that objects work in Quorum is it is implied that if you don't say like equals undefined or something, it is implied that it should be made. And so it runs a constructor with no parameters, basically. And if you want to, you could change that by using the onCreate block.
Okay.
But basically the gist is when I say particle mote, that's a line of code I have here in my explode tile action. When I say particle mote, that makes a new one. It constructs one right then, right there, because I didn't tell it not to, basically.
Okay.
And the reason for that is basically because Stefik is always going to be more accurate in his recollection of the study stuff than I am. But basically the gist of it is that it trips up novices having to use new. If you just make it for them, it reduces errors.
If I recall correctly, the debate on this one is there isn't that many studies on people constructing objects in the literature. In fact, only a few. And the cold hard truth is I won't mention the studies by name, but we don't really believe their results. The evidence is actually quite weak. Like there's one paper where they straight up say they basically don't believe in statistics. And I'm just like, it just makes me cringe on the inside, like how that could make it past peer review. But in any case, though, what there is in the literature seems to indicate some amount of skepticism about having parameters into constructors. Like I said, we don't really believe the result. We think that it would be worthwhile having some more rigorous studies actually conducted. However, on the list of studies that we're going to bother to actually do in the lab, it's like number 1,000 on the things that are interesting or fun to actually run. So it's like we kind of just deal with the lack of evidence on that particular issue and study other things as well. Like for example, I think it's probably going to be much more impactful given evidence in the literature right now to change the compiler errors than it is to like muck with the constructor stuff that much. So I suspect that would be like 1 in a million times of effects, whereas the data on the compiler errors from this guy named Brett Becker in Ireland seems to show, at least in his data on Java, not necessarily Quorum, but that changing those messages could reduce time to fix errors by about 20%, which we don't know if that'll hold in Quorum, and the messages are totally different, so it may not. However, that's pretty big. Like that's a huge effect, whereas changing constructors around in some way, I suspect will be almost nothing. So it might be something, but it just feels unlikely compared to other.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's simply because I'm used to, sort of
Yeah.
manually instantiating
Equals
objects.
new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
So it's
what
all
is-
automated. It's all automated. There are
nice.
downsides. There are downsides. So yeah. But
Any other questions regarding anything in the game?
Okay, I'll bite. The tab key.
Sure. Sure.
How did you do that with first? You sort of had a automated list as you tab through. Did you enforce a tab order of some kind in the interface?
Right. So there are two different places where tab ordering gets used. In the heads up display, which I only touched really briefly on because I wanted to illustrate that it was there, but then I otherwise didn't use it. The heads up display uses a normal tab ordering. So it's just each item says what the next one is and what the previous one is. And it's so you just press tab and it goes to the normal focus system in the game. For the points of interest inside of the game, that one I opted to do manually, and I could have done this one with the other approach using just the normal tab ordering sort of approach. But instead, the way that I did is I overrode the tab key while you were in that portion of the game, and then I dynamically generated that array of important items, because that one, it would have taken extra bookkeeping to keep track of, okay, an enemy has been destroyed, make sure I go to that list and remove it where it needs to be removed, etc. So it's not the most efficient way to do it, but it was faster development wise to just say, okay, you are in the main game space. You're not in the HUD, basically. So if you're not in the HUD and you press tab, or if you press shift tab, go grab the list of important things, see which one you're already on. If you're on one already, go to the next one in the list. Otherwise, just jump to the first thing, which is always the player.
Oh, okay. So, and how do you detect whether you're in the main game area or not? Is there you had to manually have a flag, or
basically the gist of it is the HUD, the heads up display. I just check to see if one of the elements in that display has the focus. If it doesn't, it has to be the main game area, because there's the only two places that it could go.
Okay.
There's it's not the most robust thing for large scale things, but I cheat a lot with the games I do for Epic by saying I know exactly, it's very strict scope. It can only be these things. Take advantage of that to make it easier on myself.